Hee 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 hee. Wowie, wowie, wow, wow. View on YouTube. Oh, there's a Kate. So, fun facts. First viewer in the stream, Kate. Um, TikTok hates. Hi, TikTok hates. Uh, uh, or this app hates. Its content creators. It literally does not give you access to stream keys. So we're doing it right here. We're doing it like this. I have a question already from the Discord from Elijah. I want to talk about. Let's go to where is it? Player advice and how to be a better player. One of my Olivia's in the chat as well. Elijah asked, "What would you advise players to do if they're struggling to connect with their characters?" And I think this is an interesting question. I think there's a lot of people who try to externally create references for the feelings of their characters. So these are the things. There's someone who responded to Discord about like creating playlists and creating essentially like your like Pinterest, like creating the vibes of the characters as an external reference to get you into the feelings of what it feels like. But I think there is a different, better solution, which is connecting with your character at the point of wants and motivations. What does your character want? What do you want out of the game? I think brain multiple things. I think that is a like more emotionally grounded way to get into character, right? Because when we're talking about getting into character, when we're talking about existing as another person, you experience the experience of the character through the lens of their emotions, but it has to be a lens, right? It's not like a mirror or something that you can create externally from yourself and reflect back upon, but rather it's something that you have to be moving through to access the character. So this is my idea around connecting with character. To join live as a guest. My idea around connecting characters. I'm losing my train of thought. I'm keeping track of too much on too many streams, too many things going on. Fuck it. I don't even care. I'm struggling. I also received a question from John in the Discord, which is, for a new player to Saga, are there any lessons learned or things you wished you saw more from players from the playtest? And I'm going to use this as a moment to talk about, again, I think people's connection with character, and how I think sometimes in certain TTRPGs, the experience of the game or the building of the character actually gets in the way of trying to connect. So what I mean by this is when you sit down to build a character in something like D&D, you have your choices of fighter, paladin, etc., all of these classes. And from those classes, you have this sense of what you are supposed to be, that you are limited to the idea of, oh, if I am a paladin, I'm a noble knight type figure. If I am a druid, I am someone who's one with nature. And the experience I had in a game that I've created, which is called Saga, we start always at level 0. We don't choose classes or skills. We choose, or rather, we don't choose anything. You start with a completely empty idea of the character as far as a mechanic is concerned. And you enter a world and see how you exist within that world. And what I found that allowed to happen in the game is that people were making mechanical choices, right? People are making choices within the game about what mechanics they think fit the character in order to like through the experience of playing the character. So you have the character existing first, and then you have like as a narrative, the person exists first, and then the and then the mechanics of the character follows from that. So, and I think that's something that also, so this is about a game that I have designed called Saga. I think that's something that you can do in like most games that you play, although that is not the intention of the design. So, for example, if you're going to sit down with Dungeons and Dragons, you look at the abilities like spell casting, the like attack action, or like rather you look at proficiencies. I was thinking of extra attack. You look at proficiencies with weapons, and I think you can play a character without any skills and sit down and decide first by playing the character what proficiencies belong to them. And I think that as I approach running games and new campaigns has been pretty like flawless as far as achieving what I want it to achieve in terms of like a player's experience as their character. Everyone who has played through Saga so far, as far as I'm aware, I mean, actually, there's maybe like one or two exceptions that I'm thinking of off the top of my head, but by and large, characters or players are becoming more connected with their characters because the characters are being understood through play rather than being created in isolation and then dropped into a world and trying to make sense of it afterwards. Example of D&D will be on number. Yeah, like the worlds beyond number. When I started designing Saga, when I really started putting down the heavy work into the game, was just around the time that Worlds Beyond Number was coming out. And I think I don't know, I don't remember if I had already been designing Saga in a certain way and then Worlds Beyond Number opened my mind or like affirmed what I wanted from the game, or if Worlds Beyond Number came out and then that informed some part of Saga. But I remember listening to the children's chapter in, or whatever it's called, in Worlds Beyond Number, and immediately feeling like that is such a better way to get towards your character rather than deciding what everything is first, by like entering the world and then seeing like what belongs to this character, who is this character from the experience, not from the idea that I want to create of them, but from the experience of playing the character. And so I think when I started play testing Saga, I had a couple of things in mind. That was one of them. But then the other was also understanding that in trying to teach someone a system, in trying to teach someone something that is completely new and introduce all of these ideas, there is no sense in trying to get someone to understand what the system or what the rules are before it is in context, before it applies to them. So when I was playing the game, or rather when I was beginning to play the game, I just was having a, I always consider whether it comes down to session zeros, like introducing someone to a world or introducing something to anyone new. I'm very mindful of how people interpret information. There's always going to be a barrier between you and the person you're talking to as far as understanding. You can be as clear as possible, but unless you are, again, like explaining something in a job in context or have context around you, if you're just isolated with this person trying to explain something to them, there's always going to be a barrier. And so what I figured out for myself when I was running Saga was looking at this game and being like, what are the barriers to the players learning the rules? And very quickly it was like, it's just the experience. There's no sense in trying to get these people to understand anything before they've had the experience. So as I was running those initial games, it was like I didn't feel the need to present anything to the players. And then that was extremely successful. Like that, I think, caused or allowed for such an easier time in the players being able to play the game, having fun with it, because there wasn't this like 50 pages of rules that players needed to figure out just to roll a couple of dice, right? And I think that's also something. So a couple of months ago now, I was at a convention in Toronto called Breakout Con. And Breakout Con is a board game convention. It's where a fair number of people go to like play test their games. And one of the things that is I think was like the biggest drag of an experience as I went there and playtest a couple of games is that like any given game or any given instance, you had to spend at least an hour on learning how to play the game before you could actually play the game. And that was like with the designers of the game trying to streamline things. I think the first game that I played took like an hour and a half to get going, and then another hour and a half of maybe actually playing or less. So I think within the context of TTrpgs, there is a needless barrier as people try to create almost too much content for players to learn, or people are under the impression that again, players need to know what they're playing before they sit down. I don't think, because we are not playing video games, because this is coming from imagination, I think it's best to lead with people's imagination, right? When someone enters a character for the first time, it doesn't actually matter what mechanically they can do. It matters what they want to do, right? And then how the mechanics interpret that. So the want has to exist first. Players should want to play their character. And as they play their character, you should be presented with opportunities to provide mechanics. And then also, like, it takes just a lot of burdens away, a lot of the stresses and burdens away from people's experience of game. Um, that is my big opinion. Someone please leave a comment. Um, I'm struggling. I had such a bad time trying to get this app to function. And then I didn't. I'm just live separately on my computer and then also on this app. Um, Almost all of my energy for that was drained. Ugh, what a nightmare experience. I hate the what size shoe are you question. I hate the people joining and asking the most unhinged stuff. Why? Why exist? I'm killing it so hard. Thanks. Yeah. And that's also information that I'm never going to share. No one gets feet for free is what I'm saying. Some comments in this live were filtered to protect the community experience. That's actually a great question, Olivia. So what's your biggest piece of advice for someone who wants to get into D&D? There's so many different answers to that question because there's so many different barriers to um I think people's experience of the game. Like, you need to both find people to play with. You also need to like figure out your comfort zone with like role playing and figure out like what your interests are, right? So when you step into play um a game of D&D or any tabletop role playing game, um the core experience is not one of fantasy, right? It's not one of elves and orcs and dwarves, but it is one of community. It's one of sitting around and being vulnerable with people. Um, so that distracted thoughts. So when you are like looking to find a game, um, I think people often worry. People, I think, are afraid of stepping into these heavy rule books, kind of what I was talking about earlier, where you might need to learn a bunch of rules about how the character works. But what's actually happening when you sit down to play a tabletop role playing game is an experience of just play with other people. Like, you're playing imagination with other people. Um, so I think there's like a mental barrier there. And then there's the question of finding people to play with. So you could get friends together if you can find a DM. And I think that solves some of the problems of vulnerability. Solves some of the problems of I am worried about what my experience is going to be around these people. Because if you're friends, hopefully you are comfortable with these people. But otherwise, if you're looking for a new group of people to play with, number one, in finding that group, there is, hey, Brock, in trying to find that group, there is what helped me was an app called Meetup. And so Meetup is a app that just collects people on their interests, and they have all sorts of niches across like every city. So for me, who lives in Toronto, I when I wanted to get into D&D, I looked on Meetup and I looked for a Toronto Dungeons and Dragons group, and there was one. And so I joined that, and most people in there, if you live in a city, should probably have a similar group. I joined that, and I joined this Discord, and I found a group of people who were looking to play, and I went and I DM'd for them, and that was the beginning of my experience as a dungeon master. Um, For me, I I never had the worry or the issue of um, being afraid of people. I wasn't worried about how I was going to come off to these people, because at that point I had grown a fair amount of confidence, and I really enjoyed what I was going to do. Um, but when you are looking for these people from the other side, when you are stepping into a new world, I think honestly, like, I it has a lot to do with, I think, the person who's running the game. I think there is a thing within the context of TTRPGs, in this idea that people are um, it's a community experience. It's an experience of play. It's an experience of connection with people. That someone needs to facilitate that connection, right? So my job as a GM, as I see it, is to facilitate that connection, right? I sit down and uh, I make sure that everyone has a moment in the sun, right? So you're going to have a bunch of people together, sometimes talking over each other, one person talking at once, and there's going to be people who are kind of left in the dark. So, like, some people just don't have the same amount of confidence. Some people aren't going to reach out, um, and, like speak up and speak to their wants. And so if the GM is not able to keep track of all of those people in a way that maybe someone like I would, um, that is definitely something that, if you're a confident person, you can step into um, and take that role. So for example, you're sitting down with a game. There's four people, and there's the dungeon master, and three of the four people are talking. You're amongst them, and you're engaging, but one person's a bit quieter. They don't know where they can jump in. It could be your position, or it could be something that you do to, like, bring attention to that person, right? If you're playing a character, you can sit down, or you can be there, and as your character, start a conversation with this person, or say, like, even if you're not in the place of role playing, you can sit down and look at this person, um, and say, like, hey, like, what does your character think about this situation, and have that, like, meta level conversation. Um, so I think, yeah, that's like the different things that I would say about, like, someone who wants to get into D&D. It's a community thing that you're entering into. It's not as scary as you think. But I think, like, looking into getting into this, like, new space, you do need to be cautious about the people who you're getting into it with, right? There are a lot of people in the space of Dungeons and Dragons or TTRPGs, because it exists inherently as a kind of social encounter with a power dynamic. Some people enter the position of the GM, the position of power, with the intention of being like, I want to have power over these people. And if you honestly, like, I know not everyone has the kind of access to figure out who is safe and who is not, but if you feel like the vibes are off with someone, just leave. If you don't feel safe and comfortable, in a lot of circumstances, but especially in the context of a tabletop role playing game, if something is off, just sit yourself out. Um, that's, I think, one of the more important things when it comes to having a good experience. About porting characters, high level, continuing their story. Um, so, uh, uh, presuming this is a question about Saga, So again, I'm doing the due diligence of assuming that every once in a while someone is coming in and has no idea what I'm talking about, no idea who I am. Saga is a system, a tabletop role-playing game of my design that is designed to do the things that I want from D&D, but to do them actually right. And so with that philosophy of these are doing the things that I want from D&D, in my head as I've designed it, every class can be somehow constructed through the skill trees of Saga. Sorry, I just had a Saga thought right now. So every class can be constructed through the skill trees of Saga. It's just about figuring out what the intention of the class is, and then what the intention of the skills within the system are. So, for example, when you look at something like Barbarian, the biggest thing is that you are a tank who does damage or who soaks up damage, and then you hit kind of heavy. And so for me, what that means in Saga, you have the physical skill trees, and you have things like endure and resist, that are going to get the character to that point of like, I am this heftier mechanically character, right? I am a character who can take more punishment in terms of resistance. And then when you go into Warrior, I think it's about making the appropriate choices. Like, okay, so this character might not have or be great with things like bows and crossbows, so maybe they take their throwing to get this idea of like, oh, the barbarian who can throw javelins and stuff, right? Like maybe that's why the choice is made. And then instead of armor, probably go for movement. And then instead of I guess of the close quarters, it makes the most sense to go with blunts. But every kind of decision within the skill trees is towards the point of being able to construct class within the context of Saga without forcing players' hand on flavor, right? Because there's also multiple ways to get to the same thing. You can get to a rogue by optimizing your narrative slip, like physical skills, and then also combining that with warrior stuff. You can also get it by mixing some creation in there, right? There's the context within Saga of being able to interact with traps, and although that functions, or there's a similar enough function within the narrative skill trees, there's also that in the creation skill tree. So ultimately, back to the point, it's all about finding the intention of the class and interpreting that through Saga, right? So that's why, for example, like in the magic skill tree, there is Wrath. Wrath is basically just, I want to be a paladin, right? Like there's that one specific thing that hits that paladin note that also hits the by proxy, like the healing and some other things. But also through that, I find Saga conceptually to, again, do that thing that I'm worried about other games not doing, or vice versa, which is not being prescriptive about what a character is supposed to look like. So you have, again, like your warlock. I also think, sorry, this is a tangent. When Saga to D&D, I think D&D starts its characters on higher pedestals, right? So when you look at warlock, paladin, cleric, there are general skill paths that head towards the shapes of those classes, but then there is also higher power, which kind of explicitly defines the cosmic relationships that you start off with when you enter D&D. And I think the big difference for me in trying to build that approach is, again, coming back to this idea of experiencing it, figuring out like what the character actually is, who the character actually is, what is the experience of this character, and what does that speak to, rather than defining that first, and then trying to figure out who the character is. So within Saga, as you approach something like a warlock, as you approach something like a paladin, and you get to that spot of higher power, instead of just saying this is it, like you have to earn it, and you, in a game that asks you to earn the class, in a game that asks you to experience the class first and then be rewarded with it, I think that to me brings, like, again, back to that point of connection to character. So I think back to the question until something else comes up. I was told a new player, oh, stop doing that. Player, step back if it's not it. Yeah. As far as porting is concerned, again, it comes down to intention, right? Figuring out what the character is supposed to do within the rules, or what the intention is, and trying to follow that intention through your choices. So little comments, but that's okay. Folks, I'm tired. I had a day. I got stuff to do. I don't know if I want to do it. Double streaming. Let me look. Oh, people are also watching on Twitch. People are watching on Twitch, but no one's commenting on Twitch. I can't see what's going on. I got so many funny different little viewers. I'm out. Oh wait, no, I had one more thing that I can cover. World building advice. It's weird. It's been very weird and wonky. What's the best technique you found helpful for creating wildlife in your world? This is also from the Discord. This is such a big question, because I have a very deep philosophy in terms of world building and like why things exist, which I can begin to break down. But basically within my world, actually I'll start at the end, and then I'll go through what it looks like in my world. To me, creating wildlife within a setting, you want to make sure that the wildlife follows a theme of some kind, that there is some kind of connecting trait that lets you know that all of these things belong to the same place. So, for example, it could be as simple as, in the Evans behind me, it's bugs. Everything is just bugs, right? And then you begin to explore, like what is the settings equivalent of a mount if it's not a horse? What is the settings equivalent of a beast of burden if it's separate from the mount? What is the pesky rodent, like a rat, or like a squirrel or a chipmunk, or even a raccoon sometimes, right? What is the domesticated version of whatever animal? And then begin to apply the theme to that thing. So, for example, within a setting called Philia, the theme is generally like creatures are a bit more naturally attuned. They have some like patterns on them that might indicate that there's some connection with like the plant life. And then they have, commonly many creatures have antlers or of some kind, or there's some kind of like logic behind a set of unifying traits that belong to whatever category of animal. So, for example, an infilia with antlers, a lot of the more typical mammals, like your horse equivalent, your um, kind of like beast of burden equivalent, your even rodent equivalent, all the furry things um, have antlers. So you in the sesher in the mount, you have this deer, horse, like this elk, horse, cow type thing, this large beast that has its antlers, and then on its back it has this leafy kind of pattern. And then on where else? You have the, oh gosh, what's it called? A martril, which in Philia is the little rodent. It's like a little chipmunk, and then also it has antlers. And so that's the extent of, I think, like theme that you need to connect with. I don't think you need to go like particularly crazy with anything. But when I think about constructing animal or constructing wildlife within my world, I have a like a series of things that establish the theme for me before we get to the point of creation for the wildlife itself, for what the actual thing looks like. So, for example, there is at a very base, there's kind of like the elemental composition. So within the world, the four elemental planes are crashing together and creating, whatever setting. And certain planes are going to be more dominant. So there might be more air in one particular setting. So this is a very dry place. There's not as much water. It's maybe colder. And so, like maybe in this context, these animals are fluffier from that, right? They have more protection. But you go from the elements and then you go to the kind of liminal plane. So within my world, there's like the Feywild, there's the Shadowfell equivalent, and then there's like giant reaches and dragon reaches and psychic depths and all these things. There's 9 liminal planes that each connect to different settings. So establishing what the kind of like flavor through that exists. So let's say there's a lot of air, and then there is this connection to the psychic depths. So psychic tells me that creatures are going to be a bit weirder. They're going to be a bit more brainy, maybe even sometimes intelligent. A consistent theme I do in lands that are connected to this place is that I have like little brain type parasites. There's always like a different flavor of brain type parasite. In one of my settings, they exist as like little, I think like squids with like 15 tentacles of different sizes. That just like burrow into people's brains. So like a little mind flayery, but it's just a little squid thing. But yeah, so things generally a bit more brainy, right? So we establish furry and brainy. What does that look like to me? I tend to like to create things that are funny first. So we think of a big, round, fluffy thing with maybe like a baldish head, or maybe even like an enlarged kind of head that looks like his brain is coming out, right? And that whatever animal is called can like send out its emotions into creatures around it to communicate, right? So already that just comes from like establishing again the vibes of the land or the setting around the wildlife. So for something like wildlife, I think, to get back to the answer, first requires the establishing of the setting, defining parts of the setting that can then tell you what the wildlife are supposed to look like, and then following whatever themes might sensibly arise from that. I think that's the end of that rant. I'm going to end my live now. And now.